Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have one more presentation. And this one is going to be an interesting one. For a number of years, Purdue has been one of the universities funded by the National Science Foundation as part of a program called Scholarship for Service. And the idea behind Scholarship for Service is that we provide a full tuition fellowship plus a stipend for lodging and fees and food and whatever else. It's a really good deal. It pays all expenses, and students get this support for 2 or 3 years to pursue a graduate degree, a master's or PhD. That in return, they are supposed to seek out a job working in the public sector for federal, state, local, or tribal governments or national labs in the area of cybersecurity, information protection. So what happens is the government makes an investment in students getting an advanced degree at a place like Purdue, and then they pay that back by helping to protect the public infrastructure. We've had a number of students through this program who've done some very interesting things, gone on to some really exciting positions. One of the places where students can go work is in state government. And our next speaker is an example of someone who went through this program, Scholarship for Service, and ended up working for State of Indiana Information. The Information Sharing and Analysis Center is one of the projects. This is something that you'll hear about for helping increase the security and privacy of systems in the state of Indiana. So one of the takeaways about this is when you hear about Scholarship for Service, or SFS, I'd like you to realize that we have put through about 50 students over the last few years through Purdue, and have gone on to help protect the country and the infrastructure in that regard. And they're doing very innovative things. Hans Vargas, our next speaker, is a relatively recent graduate who's had involvement. He worked as an intern with the Indiana office that is behind this, and is now helping with the effort to establish this in the technology park just down the road here from Purdue University. So we're very proud of the work that he's done and the work that he's doing and the fact that he's a Purdue alumnus. So please join me in welcoming Hans Vargas.
Can you hear me now? All right. Thank you, Professor. And if I can say a couple of words before I start is to recognize Professor Spath for his 17 years of service to the students and the university, as well as I would like to recognize Professor Dark, who has been my mentor and an advisor and giving me a lot of, just pushing me forward. So I would want to say that. Everything started with an internship, one of those internships that as an SFS student I'm compelled to do, and it was at the Indiana Office of Technology. And back then I was just working with the tools and the scanners, a lot of the operations, and I showed some interest like I had throughout my master's in policy. So they said, we have this project that we're working on, and we just probably need some documentation, come sit in these meetings. And that was my first interaction with what we call, back then, I codename Indiana Information Sharing. No, it was the Indiana Cybersecurity Services for Indiana. Now that has morphed to the ISAC, more framed under the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which I will explain what we are trying to do under this big goal. Initially, this project was thought out to be the next generation security operations for the state. And let me ask, how many of you are residents of the state of Indiana? right? So as you imagine, we have, the state also has some information about you through either BMV, DOR, FSSA, different agencies, more than 70 agencies, and plus commissions in the state of Indiana that at some point might have some information about you. So if you ask my boss, which is the state CISO, what keeps him up at night is basically a data breach, something that will expose that information of citizens of Indiana. They shouldn't be exposed. So the ISAC tries to fulfill a goal to protect that. So some of the things that the Indiana ISAC has as key objectives are to improve information security in the state network, reduce the cost of security operations. And this is tied to what happened in 2005, the consolidation of IT resources in the state of Indiana. And it's been a long process. So IoT right now, provides the infrastructure for the state of Indiana as a network. Now, there are agencies within this infrastructure that are special or have special needs, like let's say VMV, the processing of the VMV cards and license plates and all that. DOR might have a system that needs to be special for, transmitting information, tax information to the federal and stuff like that. So reducing costs and the aggregation of these resources within IoT was a cost-saving mechanism. Improving information sharing. We realized that, how many of you are familiar with the ISAC? Comes out of the 9/11 Commission, where basically states were not in the loop of what was going on at the federal level. So we have now ISAC as the organism that connects federal feeds to the states. We also saw that as building this infrastructure, for the state, we can also do perhaps something similar to state locals. So within the plan that we have here, we would like to the first phase of this is to start an interaction within agencies, how to protect better these agencies, how to have more visibility across the enterprise for threats and the risk that those threats represent for the network, and how to communicate. Once we build this model for the state agencies, how can we share that with, let's say, the local government? How can we do this effectively for, let's say, K through 12 or higher education? We actually have engaged Purdue University from an IT perspective to the state IT to kind of start sharing that, at least in a pilot mode, and how to, Purdue University has a SIM, which is, it's a McAfee product, used to be Nitro. The state of Indiana has something similar. So how can we send this information to an incident management system that we have procured? So state to locals, and also how to reach out to the critical infrastructure. And these represent some challenges because the critical infrastructure, depending on the size of the critical infrastructure, might be already in communication with the federal or doing something because they might have some of the resources to be part of another ISAC. For example, there could be the FSISAC, which is the financial services. And also promote economic development. These might fall under helping what we're trying to do with the state. We're actually going to be located at the Purdue Research Park, where we are inviting students to come and be part of this. Perhaps many of you in the audience are partners of CERIAS, and so might be looking to some of those students as well that hopefully will have some of the exposure to a security operations center. And perhaps we can attract some of you to stay and come and build a shop here in Indiana as well. So I will go briefly about some of the services we have identified with the help with EMC or RSA Consulting. One of them is base monitoring. Basically, is to understand what is in our network. How can we see the visibility over the threats? Incident management and portal metrics will tie with the incident management system. And the portal and metrics, it's intended to, for example, give access to give this access to agencies, especially the larger ones, that they have perhaps an IT group within their agency, some visibility of their agency. So they can also manage the threats, they can see the alerts that this incident management system can provide. Security awareness services, and I will explain more in detail about what is this. It's basically building, it's part of training and building a brand as it is the ISAC. Then we have other services, how to deploy the services, depending on the complexity. It's a gradual complexity. We are looking at 3 first ones, and then as we go, we have 5 more to deploy. Advanced monitoring, incident triage, incident response and forensics. This is a capability that perhaps, in the example of forensics, falls under the Indiana State Police, where criminal investigations are performed. Building maybe that capability within the ISAC to help other agencies as well. Security application administration. This is perhaps one of the last services to release, where we are thinking, once we build this for the state and we can say, hey, we have this model, would you like to be a tenant of this, the ISAC? And when I said that, I also recognize that there are some hurdles in the way that at first we are building this for the state of Indiana. And we can pretty much force agencies to be part of it. But when we want to play along and they say, we have this infrastructure, would you like to play along? So if we go to the K-12s of Indiana and say, do you see benefit on being part of this? These are the things we would like you to share with us so we can share among the K-12 in Indiana. Or if we say to the small businesses or perhaps county governments, do you see any benefit on providing this information to us? Or if you're not quite there yet, how can you be, can you get there so you can start sharing some of this data with us? Cyber intelligence services. This is something that it's tied with understanding our infrastructure and then looking at some of the things that happen in the state network, let's put it that way. So some of the capabilities we would like to have is reverse engineering, tracking malware. And then the cyber intelligence intel clearinghouse implies that we have reached that level and we're moving to a next level where perhaps we can also tie with federal feeds and make sense to what is relevant for Indiana. And we can perhaps learn from things that are happening in the neighboring states or across the country. I'm showing here some slides from RSA, which they were our security consultants, and these are the base monitoring, incident management, portal and metrics, as well as security awareness. As those, and there are more columns here, but I didn't want to show that at this point. These show to be the least effort, perhaps less investment, and higher outcome of implementing first. So we have decided to go with base monitoring, security awareness, incident management, portal, and metrics. And the next phase of this will be advanced monitoring, incident triage, cyber intelligence services, cyber intel, and the next phase will be those 3 as listed. One thing I wanted to mention as well is this is probably going to morph. Right now is, as I said, the ISAC is part of the state initiative. But the question remains as, what does it look like when you reach out to the critical infrastructure? What are the controls in place, or how do we entice the private sector to come and play along? So for example, things like, how do we make sure that perhaps the information shared is not a public record? So private sector can want to play along. How to implement programs like PCI, which is a protection of critical infrastructure information, which is a federal program in order to protect the information they share. So there are a lot of things that we are probably going to figure it out as we go. But at the same time, we would like to say that this is an important project. I believe it's an important project for the state, as we see and recognize that we are vulnerable and we are moving towards doing something about it. Now, I received this comment before, is you are building a security operations center and you are basically saying that the students are going to monitor that. And it's kind of for some people that say that doesn't make sense because it's a very important piece of the security for the state. Yes, we recognize that, but at the same time, there are things that we have done in terms of security at IoT that we have SOPs for it. So perhaps those are one of the first things we can deploy for the students to have that experience. And then at the same time, when we look at some of the other services we plan to roll out, we envision that we will have the opportunity to have more full-time employees that perhaps are the students that are right now working on these three services: base monitoring, security awareness, incident management, portal and metrics. And we can start building that relationship and that trust as they can part of the state government. We can start giving them or empowering them to take more ownership of other rollouts. One last thing I would like to say is before, if we have questions, we're looking for interns at this point. We would like to have a soft rollout of the Security Operations Center for these three services at the state of Indiana before we bring it to Purdue Research Park. So we are, for those of the students who might be in the back and might be interested or looking for an internship this summer, we are actively pursuing those. So we're looking at them. If you're interested, please come look at me. And we're also looking to hire people for September 1st, which is the date where we want to have the first, to have the ISAC standing at the Purdue Research Park. And that's the update I have. Thank you.